The oil and gas sector is among the 6 core industries in India and plays a major role in influencing decision-making for all the other important sections of the economy. India's economic growth is closely related to energy demand, therefore the need for oil and gas is projected to grow more, thereby making the sector quite conducive for investment. But as India explores its natural resources in the oil and gas sector, the industry does face a credible risk from multiple security threats. The risk of militant attacks on oil and gas facilities, including the pipeline and transportation network, disruption arising from lack of skilled workers, and also increasing challenges from millennial threats such as cybersecurity issues. We asked Professor V.K. Paul of the School of Planning and Architecture on his views on some of the major risks identified during security audits of the sector.
Petroleum and oil infrastructure in the country is also another area very closely needs to be considered from the point of view of risk and the planning considerations. And we also have a very interesting issue of stealing petroleum and oil products from these facilities, because these facilities extend into large tracts of land. So every part of that facility cannot be provided with the the fencing or the physical security. So that creates a kind of vulnerability. Then we have the pipelines which are running through large number of areas where some of them we can fence, some of them we cannot, and they may travel through the vulnerable areas of different kinds. So each area needs a different kind of an assessment, and therefore some kind of an infrastructure needs to be provided.
It is evidently clear that the industry has a number of issues which need to be addressed. And in this episode, we will be looking at the introductory assessments of what our critical infrastructure security looks like when it comes to securing our oil and gas facilities.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. And in this episode, we're looking at the safety and security of oil and gas installations across India, particularly in the light of the fact that the Indian government, on the basis of the pronouncements made by the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, that the Indian government is hoping to cut down its dependence and reliance on oil imports by 10% by 2022. That means more opportunities for investment by foreign investors in projects across India, and some have put this figure close to $300 billion US. But equally important is the fact that in India, there is a large infrastructure of oil and gas installations that need to be protected and to provide a stable climate for further investments to come in. And to look at that, we have two experts who understand the subject a lot better than any of us do because of their hands-on understanding and experience with the subject. We have with us for the first time on the show Mr. Shyam Ratan Mehra, former Secretary to the Government of India, Secretary Security, and a man with considerable experience across the country in terms of internal security. And being an Assam cadre IPS officer, you have seen oil and gas installation, I'm sure, rather closely in Assam, which has a lot of infrastructure there. And we have Colonel Rajkumar Yadav, who is an expert on oil and gas facilities across India. So, Mr. Mehra, sir, I'll request you to enlighten us all with an overview of the oil and gas security infrastructure in India and some of the challenges that you feel that we face.
Thank you, Maruf. What you have asked me is perhaps a very major exercise, but I'll try and do whatever I can, because we do have so many installations in the oil and natural gas fields that it is difficult to talk about the security at all. But in general terms, we all know that oil and natural gas, especially petroleum, is the most strategic of resources, and it is one of the critical infrastructure sectors, which is almost a lifeline sector and needs to be secured. Now, there are a vast array of assets, as you know, in the oil and natural gas field. The assets are related to exploration, to production, transportation, distribution. So what we have is upstream and downstream assets. Plus, we could have supply chains which extend across our borders. So you can imagine the kind of facilities that would be required to actually bring oil to areas where it could be refined, or gas for that matter. Now, we produce around 1 million barrels of oil per day against our requirement of around 4.5 million barrels. And therefore, we do have this extensive structure, which is geographically spread along India's hinterland and along our coastline, and is therefore vulnerable to multiple threats. It could be crime, criminality, insurgency, terrorism, conflicts and tensions. So the security grid per se has to be complex. And behind the scenes, what we have is the activities of several national institutions. For example, we have national intelligence capabilities, federal and state, monitoring the threat scenario. We have police forces and special forces to intervene in case an intervention is necessitated by an attack. Not all of them are deployed on the ground, but this is part of their charter to look and monitor the situation and intervene as and when required. But for the physical security of assets in the public sector domain, and most of the assets, I think, in India are still in the public sector, unlike the Western world, the USA, or the European Union, where most of it is outside the governmental sector. The CISF is deployed at a lot of the important refineries, platforms, oil fields, etc.
Right. So you've given us a very comprehensive picture that, you know, it's right across the country and there are challenges and it is being addressed by the government. You know, to say that we will only wake up to a crisis when the crisis comes, I don't think that is the case. I think the government needs to be credited for keeping this sector secure. But Colonel Yadav, you know, there are other challenges that also are there, other than threats from terror groups or threats from internal insurgencies, as Mr. Mehra would so well placed to comment on it because of his experience. But, you know, from what I understand, you know, there are cases of oil spills which happened off the coast of Chennai in 2017. There are cases of certain other natural disasters which could impact on the oil and gas installations and their infrastructure. So do you think we are adequately prepared to deal with those emergencies, and are those emergencies more likely to occur than the kind Mr. Mehra was alluding to, that in terms of attacks on infrastructure?
Sure. So, as you rightly said, we've had an incident of oil spill in Chennai last year. And we've seen that it was so difficult for us to actually control the situation, and it was all a half-hazard manner in which we controlled the situation. To be honest, I personally feel we are still not geared up to take these kind of major challenges. And most of our installations or facilities concerning oil produce are in areas which are prone to natural disasters, which are into, you know, seismic zones which will have natural disasters, not today, maybe in days to come. But at the moment, I personally feel we are not really geared up to take these kind of challenges, or any kind of solution or any kind of thought process from the government side. I don't see anything happening on that account.
Okay. So, Mr. Mehra, sir, there was a warning given by the IB in 2016 to the government that there is a need to beef up the security of oil and gas installations, partly because of certain conversations that they intercepted between Pakistani handlers and their plants here in the Indian system. So if you, as you were saying, that there is a lot of effort that has gone into with CISF and other bodies to provide security to oil and gas installation, how much more can be done?
I think a lot more can be done, because what we have is a situation where we do protect, but we don't do it under a national infrastructure protection plan or a national strategy. So we do have to have this umbrella kind of approach where we can sort of synergize all our capabilities, both in the public sector as well as in the private sector, and with the government, to put forth our best foot in security. I think a lot needs to be done. We need to undertake an audit, especially of installations, of vital installations, or vulnerable installations, selectively We have to select the installations, prioritize the installations, and then undertake an audit as to how well they are protected, and gear them up for the kind of assaults that we may envisage. And these could emanate from any quarter.
Okay. Colonel Yadav, another area which has come into the news again and again is the theft and pilferages that takes place of oil and other resources. Some statistics that are doing the rounds is that there is an oil mafia, for example, in the state of Maharashtra. As per ASSOCHAM, they have a stake in an estimated stake of about 10,000 crores. And likewise, there would be oil mafia and gas mafia elsewhere. So how do you handle and how would you take on further the point Mr. Mehra has just made in terms of lot more can be done? The big area is pilferages. How do you address that?
So just
And
adding,
more so, sorry if I may add, since these areas are all largely in the domain of the government's controlled security, and it's not easy for people outside the government to tell the government what to do.
so certainly, I'd like to add on to what Mr. Mehra actually said. Most of the operators in oil and gas sector are dependent on their own private securities. So we don't have any CISF support or any government agency which is giving us support in terms of security for these people. For example, when at an exploration stage, if a company has to go into remote areas, generally these areas, when you are doing your seismic surveys, which is a first stage of exploration, you are going into hostile and remote areas where you don't even find the police presence. Even if it is there, it is very, very thin. So you are largely dependent on your own security. So I will not really agree that government is doing a lot of things to give us secured environment to the operators. And when we talk about FDIs being coming into India, I don't think this will give a comfort level to more foreign players in case we have this kind of a scenario. So I seriously suggest that we should be thinking on these lines, and the government has to really crack on a method wherein we can give a comfort level to foreign players to invest in oil and gas sector in India. Now coming on to your point of pilferages and all, pilferages will be part and parcel of the operations, because how do you supply your crude oil to the end user? So it has to be midstream and the downstream activities. So the pilferages can take at both the segments through pipeline, because the pipeline again has to go from one place to another, which is an entire acreage which cannot be protected manually. So you can't put man at every inch or every foot. So you have methods to do it in terms of having your drone surveillance, or maybe by helicopters, or have your intelligent systems which can give you alerts on those kind of. Here also again we are failing in terms of technology. We don't have much. We've had a recent case of Cain India pilferage which was happened last year only. And there is no account of as to, we are not even sure as to how much of pilferage has taken place. So this is the kind of preparation we have in these areas.
Okay, so there are a lot of steps that need to be taken. Yes, Mr. Mehra, a quick point before we go in for a break, sir.
I agree with what my co-panelist has said, but I do feel that the government can and must provide an overall environment of peace and tranquility and security and safety. There is much, as you know, Maruf, that the companies, the private companies and private players need to do by themselves. They cannot shirk their own responsibility in this regard. Government cannot provide security guards or policemen to guard every establishment. Now, the way it is done abroad is this, that the government takes the lead within a particular critical infrastructure sector, and what happens thereafter is a combination of government and private players getting together to chalk out their priorities and draw out plans for protection, safety, resilience, etc., so that the sector follows a uniform approach, and security per se, proximate security of plants, etc., has to devolve on the private companies themselves.
Right. So what you are suggesting is a better model of public-private partnership, but equally important is another major area of threats to oil and gas installation, and that is cyber threats. But we'll look at that after a break. Welcome back. We are continuing to look at the security of oil and gas installations across India, and we have two hands-on experts who look at security of infrastructure and the business of oil and gas installations continue to be with us on this show. Colonel Yadav, Mr. Mehra talked about public-private partnership. You have some very clear thoughts on how much more involvement you expect from the government. So, can you suggest a working model which can become the operating sort of principle or the model for private organizations which engage with the government and who look after, who own these installations, to say, give us at least this much?
Sure. So I think that's a very valid point and a suggestion in a form. I think at the government level, we have the Ministry of Petroleum, Oil and Gas, and we have private players who are identified, who are big names in the country, who are part of oil and gas exploration in the country. I suggest that the government should invite these people, make a forum at the ministerial level, and take out suggestions from these people as to what kind of infrastructure problems they have, what kind of security related problems they have, what kind of protection they would like to want from the government, what kind of additional efforts the government can give them in terms of, like we are talking about CISF, whether it is possible for all the private players to bid for CISF. I don't think it's a practical solution. So how do you mix the two? Can you ask the state governments to give some kind of a the police protection, at least not CISF? So I think those kind of thoughts can be mulled over at that platform, and government should come out with some kind of a regulatory body and suggestion and standardize the entire process. This minimum requirement has to be met if you are operating in an oil field.
Just two quick questions before I go to Mr. Mehra, because he will respond to some of the issues that you brought out. But one, is there a body that represents the whole lot of private players in this oil and gas business which can engage on their behalf with the government? And secondly, is there a model that already exists of at least some companies which have adopted a system of their own security by paying a price to the government for security? To give you an example, that years ago in Bangalore, I had seen that Infosys had paid for and received CISF protection for the Infosys major infrastructure. Not everybody has that kind of money, but is there a model that can work?
Absolutely, it's possible to work on this kind of a model. As you asked me, is there a body of private or the corporates who are into oil and gas exploration? I don't think so. There is anybody existing at the moment.
So the first step is to create a body.
First
because
step
the government can't be talking to all individual players.
Absolutely. So that's what I said. If the Ministry of Oil and Gas ask these people to come together and form a forum, and they can get linked to the government body as well.
Okay.
So that's one aspect.
So Mr. Mehra, sir, before you respond to what Colonel Yadav has to say, I also wanted an add-on question from your earlier remarks, and that is the best case models of security in the West you talked about, where the government takes the lead and gets the private operators in play, and some of the big breaches in the West or the Western or overseas model which happened, because since I know from past experience that you're an old guru in critical infrastructure security. So what is it that you'd like to throw light on?
Maru, what I will do is I'll sort of answer both your questions. The earlier question about how do we sort of protect the private sector, which is, in my view, manifestly inadequately protected. We need to do something there. And how do we create that coordination where the private sector does get the support that it needs? Now, I'll give you an example of how it works out in the West, and that provides you the model which can mutatis mutandis be followed in India as well. I'm not saying that we replicate it entirely, but we take some elements of it and indigenize that and use it to our own benefits, because the Western model is extremely complex. But here are the broad outlines of that model. In the USA, they started looking at critical infrastructure almost from 1998 onwards. And what they finally came up with is a national infrastructure security program, protection program. And in that, there are 16 or 17 sectors, of which ONG is one sector. And power is also a part of oil and of the energy sector. Both fall under the energy sector. Now, the lead agency, which is supposed to do everything, as my co-panelist mentioned in this regard, is to take the lead in sort of securing this sector, is the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy per se has to liaise with the Department of Homeland Security, which after all is the guardian of Homeland Security.
In the US.
In the US.
So therefore, the Petroleum and Gas Ministry should liaise with the Home Ministry.
Home Ministry.
Yeah.
And all the governmental institutions, both horizontally and vertically, are represented in the Government Coordinating Council. This is a structured approach. And the entire producers in the private sector are represented in another council. All these people get together and frame the national program for protection of that particular sector.
We haven't done anything like that.
They are assisted by the DHS, which provides them information and information dispersal centers. They provide that. They provide them resilience experts. They provide them security experts for advice and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the private sector, on the basis of the guidelines which are formulated and the plans which are formulated by this body, looks after its own security. They volunteer. In fact, they have their own information collection and dispersal centers. They have done that. So that is the model that they follow. And the other thing that we can do is, since the CISF cannot be everywhere and government cannot provide all the resources, we need to create certified private resources, certified private companies which match up to a standard, and then are deployed by the private sector for their own security and the security of their plants.
So
this is the kind of model that we need to follow in a more rudimentary form, perhaps.
At least we can start there, and we can keep polishing it.
start.
Colonel Yadav, I want to move away into another area, and that is cybersecurity. Now, we all know that cybersecurity is a threat and is a challenge of all sorts to oil and gas companies and to the industrial sector, which is linked with this, as well as in other industrial sectors. So what kind of new types of cyber assaults do you foresee? They could be meant to sabotage a firm's operations, or it could trigger an explosion. But likewise, there is the fear of just cybersecurity simply doing a data breach. Is there an element of preparedness to address this issue?
No, again, sorry to say that, I think we are not even close to even thinking about it. So cybersecurity is basically what? In oil and gas sector, all our traditional infrastructures are, they have to align with the hardware and software. And it has to work on internet. At the moment, we don't have any regulations from our government side or from the private bodies itself within their thought process as to what kind of regulations are they going to implement when they, as far as cybersecurity is concerned, for their facilities or in terms of data breach. And this can really turn out to be a very, very huge loss, because this could be politically motivated by not only within our political scenario, but it could be international political sabotage also in countries, because infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure is a major infrastructure. It could really cripple our economy. So I think that is one aspect which is very, very important, which is thought of otherwise in all across the world by all the better of the players in the oil and gas sector.
Just another quick question before I wrap up, and that is that it is said that the workforce in the Indian oil and gas sector, majority of them are due to retire in 5 to 10 years because they've already put in X number of years in the business. Do we have a kind of system of preparing the next gen workforce, and do we have a kind of system of doing some kind of vetting of the people who are going to enter the sector? It's a critical sector.
Absolutely with you. And we don't have much, like we have 1 or 2 institutes which are typically training people into oil and gas security. For Reliance has got its own security setup. I don't think there is any other company which is training its own people in this field. They have to depend on the private players who are outside available to them as third vendors. we don't have any institutes which are giving training in terms of cyber security or physical security aspects to oil fields or productions or midstream and downstream retails and wholesale aspects. I actually don't see any institutes.
So,
which are
so
doing that.
obviously it's a critical sector.
It's a very
There are a
critical
lot of
sector.
challenges.
Absolutely.
But while it's easy to point fingers at the government to say the government is not doing enough, the industry itself needs to pull its socks up, needs to do more, needs to address the concerns where the government does not need to handhold you. You can take the initiatives to put the act together. Well, thank you very much, sir, for being with us on the show. And quite clearly, it's a very important subject. It'll keep coming up for discussion. But I think to begin with, we've started the ball rolling, and we are that much more wiser thanks to your inputs. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.